In my home country of Russia, quite a lot of things are getting banned these days. Starting with Western social media like Discord, WhatsApp and Instagram, down to basic human rights such as the right to free speech and protest. Yes, even though the situation in Russia regarding protests has always been pretty bad, after the start of the war in Ukraine, pretty much all protests have been outlawed. In Russia, if you want to have a protest, you need to first ask the local government to give you approval and the right to conduct the protest. And as you might imagine, they don't usually approve protests that go against the government. And right now in Russia, if you just go out on the street and stand there with a blank piece of paper, just by yourself, not even making any noises, you will be immediately taken away by brave Russian police for disrupting the order of society. And at this point in the West, it's become pretty common to say that Russians never protest. Well, what if I told you guys that Russia recently actually had a protest in the big year of 2025, and myself as a Russian who doesn't like the Russian government, I am pretty surprised.
Я пришла на данное мероприятие, потому что меня не устраивает то, что происходит на данный момент в моей стране, в интернете, в частности, так митинг именно о запретах в интернете.
Мы выступаем против данной политики, данной инициативы властей, так как это прямое попирание наших конституционных прав, права на свободу информации и коммуникаций.
Верните нам связь! Верните нам связь!
Yes guys, this is not doctored footage, this is not AI. What exactly is going on over here? And is this really a sign of Russians beginning to protest? Hey there people, it is your boy Roman, your favorite neighborhood Russian, and welcome to a brand new video in which we will talk about the dire situation with protests in Russia and why some Russians are still brave enough to do it. So, the protest that I showed you guys at the very start of the video actually took place in the Russian city of Voronezh, and it was actually part of a larger network of protests that took place in Russia, where the people in Russian regions protested against internet censorship. In Voronezh, Omsk, Novosibirsk, and Petropavlovsk-Kamchatsky, protests have been conducted against the restrictions of calls in Telegram and WhatsApp, and also forcefully making people use the state messenger Max. Now, just in case you guys need context, right now Russia is basically trying to shut it off from the rest of the world and the rest of the internet. Russia right now is officially restricting voice and video calls in Telegram and WhatsApp to the point where it's actually become impossible to call your friends and relatives through these apps in Russia. The connection is just not working. So tons of people are having trouble talking to their babushka, and babushkas are having trouble sending those cute videos through WhatsApp to their grandsons. This is just ridiculous, right? And also, at the same time, the Russian government is pushing a new state messenger called Max to replace these Western enemy apps. And essentially all Russians are pretty much hating on this Max app right now. The Russian people are getting forced by their employers to switch all working group chats from WhatsApp to this new Russian Max app. And not only that, but even in schools and some kindergartens, people have been getting forced to move the parent group chat from WhatsApp to the Max app. This is happening all over Russia right now, and Russians pretty much hate the app. They hate it so much that they brought down the rating of the app to 1 star on Google Play Store. And most Russians pretty much just see this app as a new way for the government to spy on the people, to punish them for what they say on the internet, and also to cut off Russians from communicating with the rest of the world. And this is precisely why people are protesting.
Верните нам связь!
Я хочу созваниваться с родственниками, с друзьями, которые находятся далеко от меня.
Если Макс не выполняет свою официальную функцию, для чего же он тогда создается? Так у Макса есть другая, неофициальная функция. Это тотальное ограничение ваших прав и свобод. Это тотальная передача ваших данных, это нарушение вашего права не только на личную жизнь, то есть нарушение конституционных основ Российской Федерации. Впрочем, когда бы ее еще не нарушали. Вот. Тем не менее, это...
That's brave. My boy is going to the gulag just for that statement alone.
Нарушение еще и ваших прав на защиту друг друга, на самоорганизацию.
Now what's actually interesting is that these protests against online censorship that happens were actually approved by the local governments and were allowed to be conducted. This is precisely the reason why in the video you see people standing and being able to talk, not police immediately taking them to the gulag. And actually what's quite interesting is that a lot of these protests that took place in these Russian cities regarding online censorship were also approved by the governments. Here's, for example, a protest that took place in the city of Petropavlovsk-Kamchatsky, again was organized by a left-wing group. And as you can see here, the police is admiring the posters that the protesters have and not arresting them. Grammar here says yes to freedom of speech, no to censorship, no to digital dictatorship. Here's some more people saying, we don't want to feed mobile phone operator oligarchs, bring the calls and messengers back, let the people speak and listen. Here's some more right here, for example, saying no to forceful maximization as in the app Max. We want free internet. that. And the thing is, right, what's really bizarre is that usually in Russia, these kinds of protests are never allowed to happen. That's for example why when Alexei Navalny, the famous anti-Putin critic, was organizing really huge, really popular protests in Russia that a lot of people attended, you would often see a lot of police brutality, people being, forcefully taken away and arrested for nothing. Because according to the Russian law, if you as a Russian citizen are attending a unsanctioned, unapproved demonstration, you deserve to be arrested and taken to the nearest precinct, where you will be not read your rights, because in Russia you get none. However, once again, these protests right here were actually allowed to happen, and the thing is, I also don't really actually think these were a psyop. Novaya Gazeta Europa here, this Russian opposition media is asking the same question. For example, the protest in Voronezh was actually organized by some pretty recently created left-wing youth organizations in Russia, Organization of Voronezh Marxists, and the Russian Communist Party of Internationalists. Were the ones that orchestrated the protest, and as far as I understand, they've never been spotted in being involved with the government in any way. And to quote one of their posts here, the creation of our Communist Party of Internationalists was a logical result of the complete destruction of the communist movements when the main parties that claim to be communist in their name took a very social chauvinist or centrist position in supporting the ruling class in conducting the special military operations. So they're also speaking out against the war in Ukraine, and they are actually putting themselves at risk here. So yeah, all in all, they're a pretty anti-Z organization that conducted a pretty anti-government protest. And I guess probably the only reason why this protest actually got approved is because I guess the Russian government just doesn't really take communists seriously, and they don't think that they can pose a real threat to the government. I guess because they think that communists in Russia are just, old grandmas. I mean, a lot of them are, I'm not gonna lie. But once again, when you're conducting protests like this, even if you got a right to protest from the local governments, you're still putting yourself in a lot of risk. And the thing is, I know there's gonna be a lot of people underneath this video that are gonna say, oh yeah, of course, the Russians are protesting. They're not protesting against the Ukraine war though. Where's all this energy for protesting against the war and Putin? I get where you're coming from, but once again, that kind of protest would just not happen. You would just immediately go to prison. Because Russia has a nice new law now, where if you disagree with the war in Ukraine, you can now go to prison from 7 to 15 years, so it just can't happen because it will never be approved. If you guys want to see what happens in Russia when you try to protest where you have not been approved, check out this video.
Павел писал антиутопию, а не методичку. С таким плакатом в Госдуме вышел политтехнолог Дмитрий Кисеев. Это пикет против резонансных поправок о штрафах за поиск экстремистских материалов.
Вы здесь ведете антироссийскую деятельность, и не надо здесь командовать.
С плакатом Кисееву удалось простоять недолго, но он успел пообщаться с провластным активистом. Послушайте этот диалог.
Такое можно только за деньги. А родину защищать бесплатно.
Почему вы не выполняете?
Я тебе говорю, сперва тебя. Кто с такими подонками, как ты, разборолся?
Вскоре Дмитрия Кисеева задержали. Кроме него, силовики задержали еще нескольких человек, сообщает «Осторожно, новости». Двое из них – журналисты.
Внезапно подошли полицейские и Дима и паковали.
This guy stood in front of a governmental building with a little sign saying George Orwell was writing an anti-utopia and not a guidebook. And yeah, he got screamed on by 10 Z people and got immediately taken away to the gulag. Oh, and by the way, I decided to check on the guy and what's happening to him now. And apparently it turns out that this guy originally was actually from Ukraine, from Crimea, and he got a Russian citizenship in 2014 when Crimea became annexed, and essentially he started living in Russia. And right now, as a result of his protest, the Russian government wants to take away his Russian citizenship. Because according to Russia, his actions negatively affect the political and social stability in society and also pose a threat to the national security of the country. And essentially his Russian citizenship must be taken away. Now you guys might say, come on, he was a citizen of another country, I guess that makes sense. They will never do that to somebody who's actually from Russia, right? I guess so, guys, except that recently a prominent Russian opposition anti-Putin critic Ilya Yashin posted about how Russia apparently decided to take away his Russian citizenship because of all of his anti-Putin activism, even though, get this, he's a Russian that was born in Moscow. This is what happens in Russia when you try to protest without approval. And this is the precise reason why a lot of Russians are just not daring to protest against the Ukraine war right now. Because it's actual life-ruining stuff. So yeah, when you read in the media about how Russians are not protesting, unfortunately a lot of media is leaving out a pretty important part about how protesting in Russia is completely outlawed, by the way. And yet people still think that Russians are choosing not to protest. But why do so many people fall for such false narratives? A lot of the time it comes down to the way facts and news are presented. A lot of media these days, not just Russian media, has an agenda and they're trying to use politically charged language to influence how you think. which is exactly where ground news comes in. Ground news collects the news from all over the world in one place so that you can easily compare headlines and coverage, allowing you to see the ownership, the factuality, and the political bias of every single source. Here I am, for example, on the website of Ground News with an article about Trump saying that he's ready to move to second stage of Russia sanctions after Moscow launches a large aerial attack. And as you can see here, Ground News shows me there's a total of 176 news sources that cover this topic. And I can actually go down and individually check out every single one and click on it and see the difference in the reporting. So while some media, for example, only talks about how Trump is threatening new sanctions on Russia without actually really mentioning the reason for these sanctions, which are record new strikes towards Ukraine, other media do mention massive weekend airstrikes. Here's another one, for example, that does mention it, so it's quite interesting to see how different media reports on the same thing and omit certain things from headlines. And another feature that I like about Ground News is actually the blind spot right here, which actually shows you different topics that have been either underreported on the right or on the left. I've been using Ground News for a while and I believe that it's a great tool that allows you to kind of see past your own echo chamber, to increase your media literacy and to see past the news that you consume. And even the Nobel Peace Center has recently recognized Ground News as an excellent way to stay informed, avoid echo chambers, and expand your worldview. And if you guys would like to try out Ground News for yourself, then go over to the link down in the description to ground.news/NFTRZ, subscribe through my link and get 40% off of the Vantage plan, which is exactly the subscription that I use. Huge thanks to Ground News for sponsoring this video, and let's get right back into it. So yes guys, apparently protests sometimes do actually happen in Russia. And once again, I know that a lot of people are gonna say that they're protesting about something that's minuscule and they should really direct their anger at Vladimir Putin, at the government. They're not calling out the government for starting the war and for conducting it. I get where you're coming from, but also, these people just don't want to spend 15 years in jail, I guess. And they're just trying to do what is possible and what is allowed, I guess, within the legal framework of current Russia. And again, they're already making a great risk here, and they are bringing important issues of censorship and where Russia is going to light. Yes, of course, it would be very heroic and cool to go out on the street with a piece of paper saying that war sucks and Putin sucks, but once again, you will be brave for about 15 seconds until you're taken to Gulag.
This is the Gulag.
And nobody sees or hears from you ever again.
Верните нам связь! Верните нам связь!
Have a little bit of understanding for people who live in dictatorial regimes, please. So yeah, like these people actually protesting and making their voice heard, and bringing up important issues. And even though a lot of Westerners like to say that Russians are slaves who never protest, you can show them this stuff and then once again they will still respond saying, yeah, they're protesting, but they're not protesting the right way. Not in the suicidal way that I want them to protest in. So actually all Russians are subhumans and slaves. Once again, buddy, if you were in a position like these people, stuck in a dictatorship, you wouldn't be so fucking brave as you are in the comments. Don't get me wrong though, right? It's like these processes right here that happens, I'm under like no delusion that these are the processes that, you know, are actually going to like bring down the governments and change something. Not really. Realistically, I think what is gonna happen to these people, you know, this organization of left-wing youth in Russia, since this protest actually got a lot of the attention of like opposition media, it kind of went a little viral actually because it's like the only protest in Russia in the last 2 years. There have been some small ones, like people have actually protested right after the start of the war for quite a while, but these protests have been obviously destroyed by the governments. There's been protests like after Navalny's death, for example, where people being like arrested for laying flowers at like places made for mourning of political prisoners. Like that's great, right? Great country right there. Arresting people for laying fucking flowers to a deceased person. So yeah, like this is actually the only protest that took place in a very long while, and it went pretty viral, right? So I think that now the government has learned its lesson, and next time this communist youth organization is going to try to, you know, approve a protest, the government is just simply gonna give them a big fat no. And also what I do like about these protests that happen is that it kind of builds a little bit of solidarity. Like in the comments here you have a lot of like Russian boomers basically supporting this youth in their protest against the government. Holy crap, are there really still brave people left in this country? It's great that the youth has went out on the streets. They are our future. I fully support this. Bring us back our connection. We don't need to be washed over. You wash over yourselves. Stop making fun of the people. We would like to talk to our friends and relatives and so that nobody would get into our personal lives. I'm also super surprised of the bravery of these young, smart people. All the success to them, these are the people that are gonna bring us to a good future. And it's like kind of wholesome actually, because usually in Russia, once again, I talked about this in the previous video, the divide between generations is so insane. A lot of the youth is like anti-government, they don't like what's going on, and at the same time a lot of the boomers support the government, support Z and Putin. And usually when the youth protests against the government, you know, when they take part in Navalny's demonstrations back in the day, they would be called like traitors and people who sold out the country to the West or whatever. But now apparently it's gotten so bad that even the boomers not okay with what's going on, right? Because this is just one of those issues that is universally agreed upon in Russia, right? It is not good to lose access to your friends and relatives and to your babushka because the government decided to destroy WhatsApp. You know, it's kind of like the pension reform in Russia, which happened not that long ago. It was super unsuccessful. Everybody actually hated it. The Russian government raised the retirement age for a population that doesn't really even have a good life expectancy to begin with, right? And that was like one of those issues where everybody was mad and everybody was on the same page. The youth, the so-called traitors, you know, and sellouts who sold out the country to the West were on the exact same page as the boomers who just got their pensions taken away. And a lot of the, you know, anti-Putin people got to say, look, we've been telling you that they're gonna fuck you over. But everybody forgot it, as they always do in Russia, so all the boomers love Putin now anyway. But yeah, this right here, the ban of WhatsApp and Telegram might be the first issue since the pension that has not divided the people of Russia, that all the people of Russia just universally hate. And again, you can do purity testing and say they're not protesting in the right way, not in a perfect way. But once again, I do believe that these people are risking a lot, and they are bringing up important issues, and they are hopefully maybe making some Russians rethink their choices and rethink their where they stand politically. But I mean, being the Russian zoomer that I am, once again, I don't really think that this will actually lead to anything. And yes, people will use the Messenger Max, even though they really don't want to. So yeah, I guess this is gonna be pretty much it for today's video. I just wanted to talk about the recent upsurge in protests in Russia. I thought it's quite interesting. If you guys enjoyed this video, then please make sure to slap the like button on it. And also, as always, if you guys would like to support me additionally, and that is financially, then please go over to the link down in the description, buy me a coffee, or become a YouTube channel member. And yeah, guys, thank you so much for watching once again, and I'm gonna see you guys in the next one. Peace.